Bismillah, alhamdulillah. Start off with the Durood Sharif. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad al-Nabi al-Ummi wa ala alihi wa barik wa sallam tasliman kathiran kathira. So today's topic, personality types and love languages. Do you know yourself and your spouse and your child? I put the your spouse bit in there because I think that's a really important part of the title of the formula. So the views of our external speakers are solely theirs and do not represent the views of Knowledge for Action. I'm just covering my back. In case Sister Miriam, you start saying things which get me into trouble. Right. So I'm your host. My name is Waqas Ali. I'm the head of Ilm to Amal, or Knowledge to Action, better known as Ilm to Amal. We've been running now a webinar series since Ramadan began. In fact, on the first day of Ramadan, second day, depending on when you joined on the Sunday. And we've started a webinar series called The Role of Parents and Educators in Nurturing World Changes in a Changing World. A bit of a mouthful, but I think you'll understand the importance of it because you're on the front line every day. The world is changing around us and we've got to nurture our children, and the world is changing. So is our tarbiyah up to speed? Is it fit for purpose? Is it nuanced, contextualized in the world that our children live in? And the statement of Sayyidina Ali radiallahu anhu goes to the nearest effect that you've all heard of, is that do not raise your children for a time that was yours and not theirs. So really, what can we do in terms of raising emotionally intelligent children? Hence the topic. This webinar is brought to you in partnership with Islamic Relief. We're very grateful for the support in making this affordable and accessible for people all over the world and different communities. And for those of you who do not know anything about Ilm to Amal, many of you do, because we're getting people who are, mashallah, registering every webinar. We've got a lot of regulars, mashallah, who are joining in. So Ilm to Amal, for those of you who are not aware, we're a specialist educational charity in character development and life skills education, both from a faith perspective, but also from a pedagogical, virtuous perspective. You can follow us on social media on at Ilm to Amal handles, and then you've got the website there, which is actually going to take you to our resources. If you want to judge us and see us by our work, we are more than happy for you to go and download the resources, or even purchase the resources, which will help the educational charity. We've got both on offer there. Fantastic resources, mashallah, designed by my wonderful colleague, Zahra Patel. So that's what we do in terms of curriculum design, family retreats, teacher training, outdoor events, social action initiatives, just bringing learning to life like we should. For those of you who missed the recap of the last webinar, sorry, there's another typo. There's always a typo in my presentations. So it just shows that I'm human. Last webinar, which was actually free, that was yesterday, for those of you joined in, we were addressing the identity crisis, or the mental health crisis amongst young people and adults. We spoke about these 6 different areas. And just a very quick recap, if you missed it, we were looking at the difference between mental health and mental health illness. There is a difference. And we were looking at the misconceptions and taboos in our community or around the topic of mental health. We had to address the crisis, the rising crisis in both the adults and the children. We looked at the impact of the relationship between the parents' health and the child's health, and the impact that has on them. Strategies that we looked at or briefly touched upon, wish we had more time for it, in managing the mental health, and how to look at, for example, parentification. It's a big topic. Mental health in dads and men, for the issues around that. And then last but not least, we went on to supporting learning, support for extra learning, training, and seeking further help. So that was a good webinar, mashallah. Again, that if you missed it, don't worry, we'll get you on the recording on that one. But it links in very nicely. It follows on very nicely from the theme that we've been running in the series. And for those of you, again, who are familiar for this, forgive me, I'll just quickly run over this for those who are joining in for the first time. We started the first webinar last Sunday, so it's been a week. We looked at rethinking education for a changing world and looking at the opportunities and challenges presented to parents and educators in doing that. Midweek, we had a cracking session on identity crisis, on the spiritual moral development. Yesterday was mental health and well-being, because one of the biggest findings that we had was that putting faith identity not to aside, but looking at faith identity, looking at the heart of that is actually mental health crisis that's taking place in there. That's not me saying something to you or selling you something that I want you to hear. This is research that Ilm to Amal and the organization here for youth, 2 independent organizations, are doing at the same time. And we were comparing our number 1 finding and their number 1 finding, and mental health was a big one. All these other ones, emotional intelligence, the one that we're talking about today, leadership, social cultural development, intellectual development, they're all key to the debate around what's causing the identity crisis, or what do we fix, or where do we start if we are going to reform Islamic education or education in general. So today's topic is, as you know, personality types. Do you know yourself, your spouse, and your child? There's another one. This is a 2-part session, actually. One is about your emotional intelligence and personality type and love languages that we're going to look at. The other one is your parental style. So these are the different types of styles that we're going to look at: your leadership style, your parental leadership style. That is a session on Wednesday with my ustad and great friend from South Africa. Zafar Bhai, you know him very well. None other than EK Ustad Idris Khamisa, inshallah. And we may also have a international speaker, a sister, mashallah, joining us, just waiting for her to confirm. And then next week we have these other 2 sessions which are going to be important for the conversation. Moving on. So the format of this webinar, you know how the script goes, guys. It's an interactive conversation, inshallah. We want to hear from you. Don't be quiet. It makes me cold, even colder than I already am. You know, it makes me nervous when I don't see anybody responding. It feels like I'm talking to myself in the metaverse. And so we want plenty of interaction from you folks. Drop us a comment. If you see anything wrong, tell us off in the chat. Do it privately, please. But put some Q&A. There's Q&A section, which is different to chat. So if you've got a question, please put it in the question and answer section, Q&A section, which is over here. And the chat is for comments, please. Because yesterday there was a lot of questions going back and forth and we were missing the questions. We're going to do this in 3 parts. We look at emotional intelligence. What do we understand by emotional intelligence, and why is it important in managing humans or human development? And all of us are in human development, whatever role you take: parent, teacher, you're the child, you're a spouse, your neighbors, you know, dealing with parents, your own parents. It may be that we're all going to be involved with humans at some point, and no matter what happens, if the machines take over, we will still need humans, inshallah. We're not going anywhere. They're going to be central to the tarbiyah of our children, despite what happens with the takeover of robots and machines. Okay, and so that's that. We'll have a 5-10 minutes on that, inshallah. If you've got some questions or comments that you want to throw in, Miriam and I would love to hear from you. Personality types is part 2. This is a chunk of the webinar, so we're going to spend a good half an hour or so here, maybe 45 minutes possibly, on the personality types or typology or typography, whichever way you want to look at it. And also this notion of love languages, which has really been around for about 10 years, I think, in the Western part of the world. If we go back to the Prophet ﷺ, then we can see a lot of emotional intelligence, and we're going to come on to that, inshallah, shortly. So what are they, and how should the findings, or how should the science around this psyche be used? Last but not least, this is a practical webinar, so we want to, Ilm to Amal is about bringing learning to life through practice and learning to practice. So we're going to look at tools, tips, strategies for married couples and parents, and that's the clue in the types of relationship are going to be central for parenting children. And this goes for teachers as well, just as much. You know, it's the same. Not every, where do I read this? Not every parent is, not every teacher is a parent, but every parent is a teacher. So this will go out to teachers. They can use this in the classroom, how to look at these tests at home, but also in the classroom for, you know, at home it'll be for healthy marriage, which is key for effective parenting, inshallah. I've explained the ground rules, inshallah. Please raise your hand if you do want to speak. We'd love to hear from you, inshallah. It's always nice to hear familiar voices. And keep the questions, please, concise and relevant to the topic. That brings me nicely to that lovely sister, mashallah, Sister Miriam from Nurturing Learners. Are you still there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Folks, Miriam, mashallah, I'll take one more slide and hand over to Miriam. Miriam is a parenting coach and she's an educational consultant, mashallah, at Nurturing Learners. So what is Nurturing Learners? We'll hear about that. She's been supporting parents, mashallah. She's a coach, so she's been supporting parents and the wider community for about 4 years now, mashallah. And that'd be interesting because COVID, a lot of parents needed support. I think we all agree we could do with a lot more coaches and people like Sister Miriam in the world, inshallah. And as you can see from there, mashallah, she's a home educator. You can see from her background, she's got 3 beautiful children, mashallah. And so she's parenting. It'll be lovely to hear from her in terms of her experiences there, because lots of people do ask about homeschooling and then also home education on top of the schools that they go to if they're not able to homeschool full time. So mashallah, Sister Miriam, tell us a little bit more about yourself, nurturing learners, and also this concept, this program that you've been running of late, because this piqued my interest and I thought, wow, we're doing something similar at the same time. I think you've already delivered this and you're going to rerun this again in after Ramadan. Over to you.
First of all, Jazakallah khair for having me. And I'm going to say apologies to the brothers first, because I have a tendency to say ladies, because obviously my work is with Muslim mums, but of course it applies to everyone. So yeah, like you said, I am a home educating mummy of 3, and I get through by drinking lots of cups of tea when I'm not fasting, obviously. So my work is, I focus on the tarbiyah of parents, and I think it's really interesting when we talk about tarbiyah, we always think about the children straight away, don't we? It's never, we don't really think about the parents. And I think my opinion is that tarbiyah starts from us, and it starts with us, which is why I'm so big on raising yourself. And what I actually mean, what do I mean by raising yourself? And what I mean by that is just becoming very clear on, I guess, how you're going to raise your child and bringing God consciousness to the forefront of that. And I think what's really interesting is in my work with parents, what I find is sometimes as parents, sometimes we take a lot of things that perhaps our children say to us or do to us in behavior very, very personally. It can feel like a very sort of personal attack. Not only that, what's interesting is I think that we tend to sort of fail to realize how, and this is speaking for myself as well, how much our own, I guess, upbringing, values that have been passed down from generations have influenced us and also influenced the way that we parent as well. So I guess in order to be sort of really conscious about how we are actually raising and bringing up our children, it starts with raising ourselves. So this, I mean, I could go on forever, but obviously the element of sort of reparenting is the element of also understanding that as much as parenting is about learning, it's also about unlearning certain things as well. Now, I want to make a huge side point here. So I think for those of everyone who's listening, there is a huge thing going on in the realm of, social media at the moment. And it's, the concept of kind of breaking generational cycles. So let's just be real and put it out there. There's certain things that perhaps we experience as children. Maybe we weren't shown enough affection, or perhaps, we were, punished, hit, in a South Asian culture that very much exists. It's normalized, right? And we don't want to do those things anymore. And that's okay, right? So it's about unpacking, okay, there's this element of my upbringing that perhaps I don't want to pass on to my child, right? Now, what do I need? How can I do that in a practical level? Linking it to this webinar, it's all about awareness and emotional intelligence, and this is what I teach my ladies, and we never ever do that from a place of shaming and blaming. And I think Sister Khalida in the last webinar, she said it beautifully in the sense that it's about taking that radical responsibility that Allah wants us to take. It's that self-introspection coupled with the emotional intelligence in order to raise ourselves. And I want to just bring in the hadith of that we are all shepherds to our flock. And it's really interesting when I think of that hadith, I always think of 3 to 4 things. I always think about it's the responsibility that we take as parents. Not only that, it's the patience that we have with our children, but also it's that we are there to obviously protect them as well. And we want to be able to hold that influence, that influence that we want. And how do we do that? SubhanAllah, we have to have that connection. And it links back to having that emotional intelligence. And
yes,
Brother Waqas, I don't know, when I think of sheep, right, I'm not an animal expert, but they're like very simple.
Please don't say me. Please don't say you think of me.
No. I mean, they're just really, they're very simple animals, aren't they? So they need a lot of mercy in the same way that our children require for us to be merciful to them. But then in the same way, it's about being merciful to ourselves in the same way. So just what's on the screen. This is a program that I run, so it's going to be the 3rd time that I run it after Ramadan, inshallah. It is only for mums, sorry brothers, but it is only for mums. But it's I mean, the transformations and the impact that the ladies who have already been on it has just been absolutely amazing. But I mean, yeah, I hold that for forever, that tarbiyah, honestly, it starts with us.
Inshallah. You don't need to apologize. We need nuanced approaches, mashallah, to the tarbiyah for mums and dads is always going to be different. It's not going to always be the same. There will be lots of similarities. It's just when you said, when I think of sheep, Brother Waqas, I thought, my heart was over here thinking, oh my God, she's going to see, I think of you. And I was like, oh God, thank God she didn't say that. Right, Bismillah. Okay, so thank you so much for that. So we move into our topic, because I know there's going to be lots of questions and there's a lot to get through. So emotional intelligence in managing humans, I think you've kind of touched upon this. Just square this off first. I'm sorry if you can't see the screen here, guys, but this was a cracking image, which sums up the series, I guess, from here onwards. But what is it? What is emotional intelligence, Sister Miriam? How would you define it?
I don't have a dictionary definition, unfortunately, but I think for my opinion, it's the awareness of your own sort of temperament, your moods, your emotions, and as well as your own, but also other people. And I think, Brother Waqas, we were talking about how we can't talk about emotional intelligence without bringing in the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, and looking at the seerah, and just looking at the beautiful stories. And I'm going to say this, and for those of you, for ladies who follow my social media, know I'm big on this. For everybody in the audience, I'm sure you may be, what's the word? You may be, I guess, familiar with the terms of gentle parenting and positive parenting and all of these things. And I always say to my ladies that, subhanAllah, whilst these concepts might be new, that it's not new. If we look at the Sunnah, right, and if we look at Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and the mercy that he had towards children, not only just children, but everybody and just every creation of Allah, that's where it comes from. So that's just something that I wanted to put there. But not only that, I really do wholeheartedly believe that it's an absolute tool for change, and that in order to have, you know, these kind of positive and fruitful relationships, it has to start with us. We have to be able to understand our own emotions and our own sort of temperaments to be able to influence. And this is again connecting it back to children, that if we want to keep that influence over them, especially in this day and age, you know, where there's so many external factors and what's going on in the world and influences everything, to be able to keep that attachment and connection with them, we need to have this emotional intelligence for ourselves, first and foremost. I couldn't see these properly, but there was two that stood out to me, and I think I'll talk about them a little bit, inshallah. Empathy really stood out to me, especially in the realm of parenting, because sometimes I think it just requires us to have a little empathy with our children and to remember what it felt like to be a child sometimes, you know, subhanAllah. It's like, it sounds something so basic, but having empathy is such a huge part of emotional intelligence. And the second one that stood out to me was, I think it's on the top right, it was the self-awareness.
Self-awareness, yeah.
Self-awareness. So again, it's the ability to be able to understand your own emotions, and not only that, your own strengths, your own limitations, just knowing yourself, isn't it? I think that's the crux of it.
Absolutely. Yeah, for me, I think on this one, all five are really central to the session today. Well, the whole series, the session today in particular, and the next three that we've got on Wednesday, Saturday, and Sunday next week. Because self-aware, what I find now, I can just come out of, you know, the parent hat or topi for 1 minute. If I put myself back into my director's shoes, in the workplace, what I see is when people come for a job interview, is they've got a first-class honours degree, they've got lots of work experience, it's a flashy CV, but still they don't know who they are. And I find this in some of the most able candidates. I also find this is common across the board and across the spectrum. The number one thing that unites the most able person, and you know, illa mashallah, I'm not talking, not everyone's like that. It's more common in the middle categories and the lower categories, but it does also exist in the top categories. I guess the standout candidates and the ones at the bottom end, or the ones that get rejected, the difference is that they know that self-awareness or lack of self-awareness. I find this is the number one category, and we can relate this to what Ghazali talks about in his Ihya al-Ulumuddin, where he talks about recognizing yourself before expecting God to recognize you, or recognizing yourself as a way to recognizing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I think it's really, really important in that. So I won't spend any more time on this, because we've got a lot of conversations to have on some important elements of this topic. So without further ado, why do humans need to understand it, and what are the benefits? And I think this is a really good sort of understanding of what summary of what emotional intelligence can do for parents and for, you know, so children. So I can see this in teamwork, increased well-being, personal well-being, reduced staff turnover, decreased occupational stress, improved decision-making, increased team performance. You can read it off there. If anybody is in a team context, whether that's you at home with your spouse or family unit, whether you work in a place or a team, whether you play sports, you will understand that knowing yourself and knowing the people around you will be the key to, optimal performance. And you can do this study across all the marriages which are mashallah happy and successful, and they've got great kids that they're proud of, to those organizations that are staff turnover is very low, staff absenteeism is really low, morale is very high, they're very successful, they're very productive, to the masjids that are run with imams being emotionally intelligent, with the congregations or not, in some cases, right? There are, I'm laughing, I shouldn't be, but we know these, we've all had these lived experiences where we know we can differentiate from a good imam or a good congregation or a good committee to another one, and even to sports. Those of you who do play in team sports, this will be bread and butter for you. So that's really sort of the benefit on emotional intelligence. Now, to the audience, everyone should be able to think of, everyone who knows the seerah or aspects of the seerah, can you think of any examples and share with us, right? Either by raising your hand or in the chat section, any examples where the Prophet ﷺ showed emotional intelligence. Like I said, this didn't start, in the last, with Carl Jung in the 19th century, early 20th century, right? This notion of emotional intelligence will go back to the Prophet, and many Greeks would argue that actually, it goes to the Greek philosophers as well. So any examples that we can think of? Let's just have a look at chat. Sister Miriam, how about you? What give us some examples, give us some inspiration from the life of the Prophet ﷺ.
I think for me, the one thing, again, I'm going to take it back to parenting. The one thing that stands out for me is when, and again, please forgive me if I make any mistakes or say anything wrong. But it was when I think there was a man who came and said, I have X amount of children, and I haven't kissed or hugged them or anything like that.
Wow.
And the Prophet said, what can I do if Allah has taken out the mercy, from your heart? It's like, what can I do? And then so many examples of, there's an amazing book, by the way, and I always recommend this one. It's called Children Around the Prophet.
Yes.
And it's, how affectionate he was with his own grandsons and just having mercy, in prayer, praying salah, children climbing all over you, all of that sort of stuff. Like, that is just for me, those are the biggest examples.
We've had two come in from Sister Fahana. The mercy of the Prophet showed at the time of Taif to the people. I mean, if you want to look at a professional in terms of how to manage your emotions and control them, even when the angel has come to you and said, just give me the green light, I'll turn them to dust. To control your emotions, and when he went to the chieftains and how he addressed them, and then he went to the common folk and how he addressed them. Wonderful example, Sister Farhana. Maulana Sajid, mashallah, thank you for your contribution. He's also echoed the same thing about how the Prophet was treated at Taif and how they mistreated him and how he treated the people of Taif. That's a beautiful, beautiful example. I mean, we can go on forever here, but Abiha, mashallah, lovely to see Sister Abiha. He faced, this is beautiful, soft skills of the Prophet. This is one of my favorite ones, where often when we talk about the Sunnah, reviving Sunnahs, we talk about hard sunnahs, tangible sunnahs that men and women need to revive in their life. For example, the beard, the length of the thobe, or the dress code, the way we hold our miswak. We think about those physical things that the Prophet did, and we get them, and they're really important. Of course, we want to follow all of them to the T. I feel we often lack the understanding of the soft skills that the Prophet had, which took his leadership levels to a completely different level, right? Which made him stand out from everyone and anything, that was created in terms of leadership and his amazing ability, subhanAllah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And one of the things, I think, just simple things, we're talking about simple things. He taught us how to be human beings and moved us away from our animalistic nature, right? Traits. And Abi has nailed it on the head here, where she said he used to face the person completely when speaking, and he didn't seem distracted. So when he was talking to me and you, he was, we see this commenter, even mashallah, some of the practicing people and some of the learned people, we still see them, they'll be talking to you, but the mind will be somewhere else. And so forth. And that's just because we're human, we're not the prophets. That's not criticism on anyone I know, anyone I'm saying. I'm not talking about anyone. I'm the worst one on this one. But if you look at that, just as an emotional intelligence, just a simple example. Subhanallah. I mean, I could go on. There's so many more coming through.
I would just want to say, but that's a beautiful example, especially when we think about, parenting and being, when we are with our children, how present are we? Because if we think about the Prophet ﷺ, like you just said, when people were in his company, it was as if they were the most beloved to him. SubhanAllah, that for me is just mind-blowing.
And mashallah, lots and lots of examples we could carry on reading, which would all inspire us and stand and make the hair on the back of our neck stand up in love and awe of this beautiful, beautiful man and Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Okay, so that's emotional intelligence. I wanted to start with that, but let's get into where now personality and love languages come into it. Because first thing I want to say to those people who understand psychology and understand emotional intelligence is that it's much bigger than personality and it's much bigger than love language. These are not just the two things. So we're not talking about, emotional intelligence is just these two things. These two things, personality typology or typography, and understanding love languages, what love means to one person, or how do they want to be shown love, or how do they express love. These you will find are at the heart of emotional intelligence, right? And so this is why we picked these two out. And honestly, I just want to say from the outside that having interacted with so many parents and alhamdulillah, so many teachers in training and being in education for almost 2 decades now, if we can understand these two things, that what makes a human tick, how is a human wired, the person in front of me or around me, how are they wired and what makes them tick, and what's going through them, what is basically trying to see the unseen in the person. In other words, what's behind the face and what's behind the head and what's going on inside the heart. If you're able to have that ability to be able to, the intuition, or be able to work them out, whether that's an adult, a colleague, spouse, your parents, your siblings, your colleagues at work, or very importantly in this topic is you and your children. Honestly, I believe, and I'm just asking you, sister, because you're in the parenting coaching, you're no doubt dealing with dilemmas. I think half of our problems, maybe 3/4 of our problems and challenges would be resolved. I really do believe that.
Absolutely agree. Okay,
so personality types, love languages. Okay, shall I go on this guy here, because I'm a psychology geek. My background is in occupational psychology. So was this guy's. So anybody know who this guy is? The picture's definitely outdated. It's definitely not from social media era. Okay, so this is a chap called Carl Jung. So what is personality? MBTI. I'll come on to what MBTI means and how it can help with our understanding of emotional intelligence in our role as parents or children managers. Okay, carers. This chap on the left-hand side is a chap called Carl Gustav Jung. Okay, born in the late 18th century and died in mid-1900s. Carl Jung, he was fascinated by the extroversion and introversion. I'm not going to bore you to death, okay? He basically came up with this theory about how, looking at people's psyche, the ego, and looking at the psyche and the personalities and the traits. And then later, many, many years later, his work is really profound. I've read his work at university and done essays on him. It's really profound work he's done. Thank you very much, Carl, for your contribution to this topic. And later on, 2 ladies by the name of Isabel Myers and Catherine Briggs came on, and you would have known these names. You would know these names if you've heard of the Myers and Briggs personality testing. That's what MBTI kind of stands for, Myers and Briggs test inventory. I think it's called test type inventory or something like that. So what they've done is they've taken Carl Jung's work and adapted it with one extra thing. So he put in 3-4 contributions, and I think they've adapted it with extra thing, which I'm going to show you now. What MBTI does, which is Myers and Briggs' testing, uses 4 scales to talk about your preference. So what do you prefer? Your comfort zone, in other words, what is natural to you, right? Your general attitude. And each of them with 2 opposing preferences. And these are called the 4 dimensions of the types you can see in front of you. So there's 4 key questions to understand our personality, okay? How the personality test comes from. You need to understand this, because right at the end, inshallah, we're going to give you the tools, simple tests that you can do, and you will, within 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes, you will understand yourself and also what the science says, or the psychology or the research says, according to Myers-Briggs and Carl Jung, in terms of how your personality sort of works. And I know these guys are like ancient now, ancient and years ago. A lot of work has been done since then by contemporary psychologists and scholars. So I think I will say this much, honestly, as a practitioner of these tools, 98% is accurate. And everyone I do this with, whether it's at home or in the family circles or social circles or in the teacher training, parent coaching seminars, they all come back to me and say to me, oh my God, it's so eerie and so scary. And I can't believe it. It's like, it's quite accurate. Illa mashallah, with exception, that there might be 2% that is, human, nothing's perfect except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So there may be some things which are faulty with it and wrong with it. It may not work for you. You might be lying. You might be biased in your answers. But let's put it down to 4 questions very quickly. The 4 questions that are based on this test. So this test is based on 4 questions. Where do you get your energy from? So are you an extrovert or are you introverted? That's the first thing. And many people think, yeah, I'm an introverted, I'm extroverted. Do you actually know how much of an introvert you are or how much of an ambivert you are? I know people think I'm introverted or I'm extroverted, but do you actually know your percentage? Do you know how strong of an introvert or how strong of an extrovert you are? That's the first thing. Second thing, you could be personally at your core an introvert, but your work or your situation requires you to be an extrovert. That makes you a new term called ambivert. So someone in the middle, someone who has to juggle that. But at your core, you're an introvert or you might be an extrovert. So we have roles which changes and situations and scenarios which changes. That's your energy. Number 2, what kind of information do you prefer to use? So this is about now processing of information. Use the senses or do you use your intuition? They are different. Again, this is coming on to the second point between the head and the heart. Thinking and feeling. Where or what processes do you use to make decisions? It's really key. And last but not least, and this is where Myers-Briggs, they adapted his work because they felt there was a need for this looking between judging and perceiving. Judging doesn't mean how good you judge, and perceiving doesn't mean how good you perceive. They just use these terms, and I'll come on to them in the next slide. This is to do with how do you deal with the people around you. So these are the 4 questions that we need to understand if we're to understand ourselves, our personalities, the way Allah's wired us, as part of us becoming emotionally intelligent. And so he came up with basically these sort of 8 keys: extroverts, introverts, sensors, intuitives, or thinkers, feelers, or judges or perceivers. And don't worry, you can take a screenshot if you want of this here. I think it's fine to do that, inshallah. Just put some donations into my Just Giving page as a small fee. I'm kidding. Let me just very quickly run over this, and Zahra, you can drop the link to this. Actually, Zahra's going to drop the link to a couple of really important tools that we need to use. All the information about the personality types and typologies and the keys, they're all mentioned in there. There's 2 really good sites, inshallah, which Zahra will drop into the chat, and something that you can go away and self-explanatory and use is quite friendly. Okay. But this is a slide which was done, I've just pinched these slides from Imperial College London because they hit the nail on the head. When we're looking at, I'm going to go through 4 of them very quickly. Extroversion, introversion. This is how you tend to act before thinking. That's extroverts. We know extroverts are not, oh, this guy likes to talk, or this person's very good. It's part of that, but you've got to understand how that is connected to the brain and why our personality or the way we are, the way we respond to a stimulus or reaction to questions, for example, the extroverts will start talking and they'll be like, hold on, he's not answering the question or she's not answering the question, but they're taking time. Their brain is talking to think. Okay, introverts tend to think before acting. Extroverts tend to act before thinking. And the list can go on, and I really don't have the time today to really go into the detail. That's why I'm giving the links. The reason why I put this on there is to remember the key point. Remember, extroversion and introversion aren't not to do with sociability or social confidence. It's all to do with where someone gets their energy from. Remember we said that? Where do you get your energy from? That's the key point on this slide. And you can take screenshots, but there'll be a link for you to follow up on. That's the first one. You're either an E or an I. Remember these, okay? These letters here, because they're going to be codes. You're going to get a 4-digit code at the end of this test. So you're either an E or an I. Like I said, you might be an A, which is an ambivert in between 2. So narrowly, you might be 5% introvert, which means actually, you could be extroverted as well, or you might be 5-10% extrovert, which means you could be introverted. So I'm an extrovert, but I love my introverted moments. I really do. I like to have my downtime. Okay, and we all need that. It's beautiful. Moving on. Someone just sent a message in here. Misconception that introverts are shy and lacking confidence. Thank you very much for that, from a shy person, right? Who just sent this in to me, saying to me, there's a on this point, do not think introvert. I mean, there's a lot of misconceptions around introverts. They do get a lot of it, you know, from us. Introverts are not shy people. Okay, let's just understand that. Now, moving on to sensing and intuition. So, in other words, what kind of information do you prefer to gather? This is you either a person of sensory, or you person who's driven by intuition. And again, the key thing to remember here is sensing is nothing to do with being sensitive, and intuitive is not anything to do with your gut feel. So you need to learn more about what is sensing and what is intuition, and understand which one actually is, which one do you prefer? What is natural to you in gathering information? How do you gather information before you make a decision, right? Do you soak it in from perception, you know, people around, so the senses around you, using your sensory senses to get the information, or is there this intuition that you have? And again, look at the bullet points there. There's lots of differences under each, and this is quite important to understand the difference. The third one is, how do you make decisions? So first one is how do you get the information? Sorry, second one is about how do you get information. First one was about just, you know, just go back here. Where do you get your energy from? Second one was where, you know, what kind of information you prefer to gather. And the third one was about how you make decisions. So remember, just someone has a thinking preference doesn't mean that they don't have feelings. And just because someone has feelings doesn't mean that they don't think about things. This is really, really important, because we can go extreme. We can put the thinkers as cold people and the feelers as people who are stupid. You know, it's not like that. You got to understand the nuances here. But this will be a really good indicator for you to look at. Think with the head or think with the heart. How, and last but not least, how you deal with the world around you. And again, look at judging. That's your J and that's your P. Okay. Judging, I can summarize judging and perceiving in simple terms. Judging is someone, largely speaking, logical, someone linear. Perceiving is someone non-linear, lateral, if that makes sense. Okay, so he likes the exploration of different choices and ideas and variety. And judging is, you know, basically make plans, come to a closure, let's get on with it. And you're going to find this, honestly, it's so interesting to look at the GMP. So I've taken a lot of time there to do that. Now, I hope I've done that. It's a very complex topic. It deserves a lot more than 5-10 minutes. But I've done my bit there in terms of just laying down the foundation from Carl Jung to the Myers-Briggs to the present day. Don't worry, this is all simplified. 16 Personalities, I think, is a website. They have, there's a test there, there's a test on human metrics. I like both of them. They serve different functions. I use it for recruitment. I also use it for my own kids, right? And the children that are around me in my classes that I deliver. Now, there's 16 personality types. There's 16 in total. That's what you need to get your head around, okay? And this is what they look like. They've been grouped. So you've got 16 different personality types. There's 8 keys, 16 different personality types. There's a 4-digit code that you can see on there, okay? This particular website has grouped them into 4 categories: the analysts, diplomats, the sentinels, and explorers, okay? This will be really interesting for you to do. Get your 4-digit code, read about yourself, and you are the biggest mufti of your personality, of your body, okay? You can turn around and tell Mr. Carl and Mrs. Myers-Briggs, Myers and Mrs. Briggs, whether you agree with them or whether you think they know you. You may disagree, okay? Take it again. Get your wife to do one for you, or your other spouse to do it for you. That brings me up on nicely, inshallah. I'm just going to quickly check on Q&A, because I haven't confused anybody. Is there a way to gain emotional intelligence? Absolutely, there is a way to gain emotional intelligence. That's the short, sweet answer. Because I was saying this to Sister Miriam at the beginning of our conversation, just before you guys joined. The world around us is changing, right? And it's going to change. It's going parabolic, and everything around us is changing, and it's uncertain. There's uncertainty and there's turbulence. But one thing that doesn't, or 2 things I should rather, 3 things I should say that don't change. Number 1 is the role of us, the adults, in the life of children's development. That will always stay the same. Agree, Sister Miriam?
Absolutely, yeah.
So whatever robot he or she comes will not replace us. We can use them for benefit and development. That's number one. Number two is the emotional tools that we need, in terms of growth mindset and emotional intelligence. We need these to keep our children, to become change makers for the future, to adapt, to change, and so forth. So those are things that will be, that is going to be key moving forwards. That's number two. Number three, the good news, as I've said to you in webinar 1 and 2, the good news is emotional intelligence and growth mindset are things that we can actually teach our children. So it's the opposite of having a fixed mindset where you think, no, I was born like this and I can't change. No, that's not true. Emotional intelligence, you can gain, you can develop, you can nurture, you can change your course. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, Allah's made us fluid in that sense that we're dynamic, we can do that. Would you say it's fixed? Does this change in life? If so, do the base needs remain? I think we'll come on to this question. I kind of answered that one as well, that it's not fixed. You can change. You absolutely can change, definitely. The research shows that. And where will the slides be available, please? Inshallah, we will put this together, a library for you. Anyone who's registered, which you all have done, we will send you an email, inshallah. You should be able to access a suite of resources, from the recordings to the videos to the social media bite-sized information to any PDFs and webtorials resources that we think are relevant and necessary, inshallah. Sister Miriam, you want to add anything before you get into your 5 love languages?
No, I think you pretty much covered everything.
Okay, just looking at the chat before I shoot, hand over to you actually. So there we have it, guys, humanmetrics.com and 16personalities.com. These 2 sites are brillianto, because human metrics, I use that as an employer, and that shows you actually about your relationship and what kind of spouse or what kind of friends or what kind of, it's quite good. And there is also one for parents, MBTI type for parents. How accurate it is, I don't know yet myself, but I do think these ones are really important. Although they come across like they've been done for the workplace, trust me, just use them for you as which is what can be a better workplace than your own home and your marriage. People with a judging characteristics are those who trust their gut intuition quite strongly. Okay, so someone's got a question here. I just want to go back and make sure I don't lose them. Just go back here, sorry. Okay, so the judging, they like to come to closure. They don't tend to use their gut. They're very much head-driven, which they act within the structure. So you can see here that they act in a very controlled way. It's not so much, but you can say gut. It's not always the thinkers don't have feelings and the feelings don't have, they don't think. Judging is based on, if you look at the slide before, there's a lot of thinking that drives judging. And so they go with what they know in their head. So the strong judgment people are the ones that think, I'm certain based on facts, so I will go with that. The people who are Ps tend to explore different sort of options and ideas and possibilities. So judging is mainly to do with what they can, see in absolute terms, or they can see in facts, what's available, and they make the decisions within that. People who are perception or perceiving led, they tend to look at possibilities. Well, we know this is a fact, but there could be this possibility. And so that influences their judgment. I hope that answers that question, inshallah. Okay, so very quickly over to you, Sister Miriam, about the 5 love languages, how this works. So personality testing is one thing. Knowing the 5 love languages that go with personality, the way you're wired, are really, really important. These 2 together will make you very powerful, inshallah.
Inshallah. No, I truly believe, not just with the ladies that I work with, also within myself, the 5 love languages are an absolute game changer. So I don't know if anybody in the audience wants to share, if you already know what your love languages are, if there's a mix or one in particular, please feel free to do so. So what are the 5 love languages? The 5 love languages are, let's just talk about children. It's just how a child feels or how a child understands the parent's love. And I think what's a really important point here is that we can say that, of course I love my children, right? We all do, alhamdulillah, right? But it's how does the child perceive that love? Because I think there's an amazing quote by those of you familiar with Gabor Mate and his amazing work. We've actually just finished, I run an online book club for Muslim mummies again, and we just finished this book, Hold On to Your Kids, and it was just absolutely amazing. But his quote is that children do not experience our intention, no matter how heartfelt. And it's like, well, going back to what I just said, no, we say we love our children, but how do they actually perceive that love, right? So this is bringing in the 5 love languages and emotional intelligence. So some of our children may prefer words of affirmation, saying supportive things, I'm so proud of you, and so many sort of other examples I could give. Acts of service, things like making them a special meal or doing something for them before they wake up for school, or etc., etc. Receiving gifts, giving thoughtful gifts. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to go and splash out and, you know, buy them everything in the toy shop. It could be something completely personalized, writing them little love notes, in whatever way. Quality time, spending meaningful time together, of course, and then physical touch, hugs, you know, affection, etc., etc. But I know I keep saying about children, but this is an absolute game changer in the family setup as well. Going back to obviously your family unit and your spouse, understanding what your love languages are, but also what your spouse's love languages and your children. It's an absolute game changer, because what it does is it means that obviously you can't be 100% sure, but it really helps with deterring those, you know, those power struggles that we tend to have. Of course, they're never going to go away, but it really, really helps with those. And it allows you to understand yourself. So I'll give you a typical scenario, right? So let's just say your spouse, for example, you like the idea of him giving you flowers or whatever it is, but perhaps he prefers to, you know, his love language is, I'm going to clean the kitchen, for example. And then in your mind, you're thinking, oh my goodness, like, you know, he never buys me gifts or never buys me flowers. But then it's like mismatch of understanding that, hey, okay, his love language might be acts of service, and that's the way that he, you know, shows me love, for example, right? And again, connecting it to our children in the same way. One child might prefer quality time with mum or dad, right? Whereas another child might prefer you again, words of affirmation. And just knowing what the love languages are. And I think in the next few slides we do go on to how do we find out what our child's love language is. It is an absolute game changer.
I'm a combination of those things. I know you asked the question about what's your love language, right? I think this might be the case for most of us. We might have one dominant love language. So for me, I just love people who do acts of service, khidma. I have a lot of time, respect for people who do that, and that's really good. So that's great. But I also like words of affirmation. You know, saying supportive things. I just can't stand people who don't say thank you when they should. So when I cook a meal for my family and wife and kids, I'll give it to them, and I just have to make a point and say, "You're welcome." You know, because it's become a joke now, but they understand. So we have this conversation. This has been really beneficial for me and my family, because the missus, I know what she likes. She wants somebody to go outside first thing in the morning on a frosty morning in December and take off all the snow off her car and warm it all up, you know, and have everything ready for her so she can just wake up lastminute.com and rush off to work. That's what love means to her. All this time I've been downloading all these recipes and trying to make all these amazing, you know, cooking food and trying to spend quality time. It wasn't working. So once you work out what you need to do, you know, you can really transform that relationship, and you can understand your people around you. I think it's quite important. Syra says, I'm different with different people. Yeah, okay, that's pretty good. I guess that's quite good, scenario based. Children, you also, Syra, I think this is a different Syra. How can you nurture your child to be an all-rounder in love languages? This way they can keep self-esteem and sanity in the world of social media. So Miriam, is it possible to have mixed languages, multiple love languages? Is it recommended to have multiple love languages, or do we just stick with our dominant one?
No, of course, absolutely. It's just like you said yourself, like we all can be sometimes a mixture. And with children, I think it's about knowing that if we recognize a pattern that there is a dominant one, it's not to say, okay, we only use that. We can use the other ones as well. And I think it's called being multilingual in your love languages. And that helps because obviously connecting it to emotional intelligence, we want our children, inshallah, to be emotional intelligent beings so they can go out into the world and give and receive love languages. So it's not just about our family units, it's also about allowing them to go out into the world and be able to give and receive as well. So yeah, absolutely, we can use all of them, and we can use the ones that we see that are dominant.
Okay, and another question was, what age can you find out your child's type? If I can just answer, I think the type, this question can relate to both things, personality and also in terms of love languages. Do you want to take the love languages question first, and I'll touch up on it from a personality perspective. So what age can we find out our children's typology in terms of love languages or dominance, and in terms of personality? I mean, just on this point, There's enough testing happening on our children from a very young age. So we don't want to be giving another test. So, but there is a scientific answer to this. So, Sister Miriam, from your love languages perspective, please.
Yeah, okay. So I think what's interesting here is because obviously I think naturally we know when kids are very young, it's the kind of physical touch and all of that sort of stuff. So I think from the age of about 5 onwards, you will start to see a certain pattern with love languages. So that's around that age.
Certainly, you can see that because the Prophet, you know, and Sayyidina Ali statement about instructing us with the children from giving them love, you know, emotional well-being and attachment from 0 to 7. So 7, 7, 7. The first 7 was really about the attachment and love language, and we can see why that's important. And so the earlier the better, I guess, that you can work out your child's love language. And you should, once you know the theory and the science, you are in the best. I always say you are the best person, the mother in particular, because of that just natural connection they have, the biological connection I'm talking about, that they have with the mother as opposed to the father. But both parents are best positioned to understand what our children love, because no test will ever, you know, be able to do that as quick as a mum's intuition. That's one thing. In terms of personality type testing, from 0 to 7, we also know from the same psychology or the same advice from Sayyidina Ali radiallahu anhu in terms of the 777. We know that children up until 7, there's not encouraged really to take instruction-based learning. And we know as curriculum developers that why do we start our particular curriculum at the age of 7 as opposed to very early on? I'm talking about structured learning here. It's because of the literacy levels and the understanding for them to be able to independently articulate and understand themselves is a lot lower, a lot less in the early 7s. And from 7 to 10, and particularly 10 to 14, that's where children are able to understand and express themselves. They don't know themselves really from this level anyway. So I always recommend that between 7 to 10, when it comes to your personality testing, it's a good time to do personality testing. Bearing in mind, children are still being molded at this time. So what they are at 7, they might not be at 16 or might not be at 18. And that goes to answering that question about, you know, fixed mindset versus growth mindset, and can you develop and move, and can you grow from one to another? Yes, you can, because your scenarios, life experiences do shape you a lot. And a lot of your upbringing is your core. And a lot of your, you know, sort of variety in the things that you develop or dimensions to your personality develop or through life experiences that you go through. So believe it or not, there is a test for children based on the Myers-Briggs testing. Zahra, if you could put down the buzz test from iCould.com. So it's not iCloud, it's iCould.com. There's a buzz test that we gave at Ilm to Amal to 7-year-olds, so year 3 primary. We give them a test. Anything lower than this, so going on to what you said about 5s, that's fine for love languages. But where they have to fill in a test and they have to answer a question about themselves, at 7, you're pushing it. It's really, it's quite ambitious at 7. 8, it really depends on the child, because you get some people who are well-read and they know that, you know, they're able to express. It's about articulation. Are you able to articulate what's going on inside yourself? And some children do it quicker than others. By 10, so between 7 and 10, there's a scale there depending on what you can do. So this is picture-based. So they'll pick pictures like this, and it will give it will tell you what kind of an animal you are. They use animals just for friendly's sake. I know we don't want to reel out children to being animals, but a dolphin or a lion. And so from there, it'll be linked to one of those 16 types of MBTI. From there, you can very quickly work out, okay, that's what they are. In adult terms, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about a scientist here. We're talking about somebody who's, you know, basically an analyst, somebody who's quite good at numbers, somebody who's quite good at feelings driven. I've done this with my own children. I can vouch for it. Honestly, it was such a big relief to be able to work out my boy and my girl, you know, in terms of the way they think and the processes, sensory information, the feel factors. It was really important for me to do that. When I was homeschooling them a couple of years back, it was really key for me to tailor the education according to their needs and their style. It worked wonders in that regard, alhamdulillah. So yeah, I hope that answers your question, inshallah. There's another question, but should love languages have boundaries so we don't become deaf, dumb, and blind in love? Sister Miriam, should love languages have boundaries so we don't become deaf, dumb, and blind in love?
That's a very interesting question. I think with anything, everything should have boundaries. I think, I mean, let's just put, for example, like this one always comes up quite a lot. So it says, say, for example, your child's love language was receiving gifts, right? We can't constantly be buying them presents and gifts and et cetera, right? So I see where the boundaries element comes in there. But for example, with words of affirmation, and I think I don't know if this is the sister who's asking the question, if this is where we're linking it, but I think you can, for me, my perspective is you can never spoil a child with love. That's my perspective, right? But within if we're talking about within the parenting realm, there's always, and I always say this, just because we're treating our children with rahmah, mercy, we're using these love languages, that's not to say that they still don't need our guidance. That's not to say they still don't need our boundaries. That's not to say, so those, I have to say those two things are really important. So yeah, boundaries are important.
I would second that, and I would simplify it by saying moderation. In everything that the Prophet ﷺ did was in moderation. So if you look at the seerah, in the way he nurtured the tarbiyah of the Sahaba ajma'in around him, men, women, and children, everything was in moderation. There was nothing too extreme, nothing too much, nothing too little. Everything was like, there was an equilibrium of a balance. And I think moderation is really important. So spoiling them with gifts, you know, you're going to create, you're going to create a consumer, right? You're basically, and then, you know, praising them too much with words of affirmation all the time, then they're going to always be seeking something for smallest of things, because, you know, acts of service, if you there's so many, everything will, I know from character education in terms of the virtues, where we talk about resilience and we talk about wisdom and we talk about, you know, generosity, there's always a moderation point. And I think moderation is beloved to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and is beloved to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That's why he encouraged that. And moderation in deen is really, really important. So I do think that's quite key. I mean, we can take, again, so many points in the seerah are coming to my mind. You know, Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam reprimanding Sahaba that would pray the whole night and not give time to their loved ones. And they would fast during the day, and, you know, basically pray during the whole night, not giving any time to the humans in their family around them. Prophet would frown at that. So these are the examples of moderation that we've got to look at. Now, very quickly before we move on, if you are a teacher, I know we're parents and we can do a lot of this. Find your parent, if you're a parent and you're a teacher, find your child's love languages. There is a test for children as well somewhere. Zahra, if you can put that link in, that'd be great. If not, I can follow up, inshallah, in the emails. My main message to you here, and again, I'm speaking to you as someone now who has to go into a classroom, never met these children before. I've only got a few sessions with them, and I've got to transform them to be change makers. So how do you do it? Before you start teaching and before you start presenting information to them and before you start really getting there, take some time to understand them before you seek to be understood. This is one of Stephen Covey's, the great Stephen Covey, you know, his principles of 7 highly effective people. Okay, one of his main findings is that leaders, that's us parents and teachers, seek to be understood before they seek, before they understand. So they understand before they seek to be understood. That's the right way of saying it. Sorry. So all I would say here, like for example, in the classroom, I would take at least 2 sessions to get to know my pupils. So I would always say to the head of the institute and say, I know you want me to teach lesson 1 of module 1, and I've only got 38 weeks. Well, you know what I'm going to do? I'm not starting lesson 1 until week 3, because I'm going to take 2 weeks to understand my subjects. These are the people in front of me, little gems. I want to know why Ahmed behaves in a certain way. I want to know why Hafsa dresses in a certain way. I want to know why you know, the child over there is despondent and playing fidgeting. I would want to just observe at least 2 sessions. I could love to do more. And I want to be able to just profile children in my head, right? Profile my learners. Maybe that's the wrong term to use, but just try to segment the class to understand who's who in the room and what do I need to do differently for child A, B, and C. I feel, and I know this is not the case, that many of us don't do this. Illa mashallah, those who do it, they've seen the fruits of it. I feel if that we did this as parents and as teachers with our children, before we run in and race in and try to give them what they do need, and prepare the ground. Look, let me give you an example. It's like a farmer. Farmer doesn't go in and throws the seed straight into the soil. He has a science of the seed, he has a science of the soil, and he has a science of the climate around him. In other words, he understands there's a timing. March to May is better than October to November for the seed, otherwise it's going to die. So he has different sciences and understandings of the seed, of the soil or the compost where it's going to go into, and then the things around him. And then he also knows what food this seed needs better than the next seed. And not one size fits all, right? So the farmer is exactly, we need to be like that farmer who understands. And that's what tarbiyya is. It comes from the root word of cultivation, rububiyya, which is basically cultivating. And it comes in the context of farmer. You use shepherds and sheep as an example why the prophets were shepherds and herding sheep, because there's so many qualities in them they need to learn as their tarbiyya for the prophets, so that they can extend that to their people, the qawm. Yeah. And so I feel that, you know, if we just understand that our children, and I think Abraham Lincoln said it very nicely in his quote, that if I had 6 years to sharpen a saw, if I had 6 years to chop a tree, 6 years to chop a tree, I would take 4 years to sharpen the saw. And I think that's a really good example of trying to understand your objects and your objective, but spend some time trying to get to know your object, and it will work wonders for you in the long run, inshallah ta'ala. So one person's mentioned already in chat, look, if you know people like the physical touch, tapping them on the back in your classroom, for example, you know, Abdullah likes that big tap, shabash on his back when he's answered the question. Get off your chair, walk across, give him a nice little tap, not a slap, right, on his face, you know, give him a nice tap and just say the word shabash, or well done, nice one, awesome, you've hit the nail on the head. And words of affirmation. So there's so many things that we can go into this that children, teachers and parents and adults, even bosses can do, honestly would make someone's world much more nicer than, you know, it probably is at that point, and they can make them move them to move mountains, inshallah. Moving on, because I'm conscious of time. Any more questions in the question bank? Just bear with me. Okay. So, Sister Miriam, what about this picture? Looking at emotional intelligence.
We wanted to ask the audience, didn't we, that how many relationships do you see here? Which is what I found very, very interesting question. And it really just, I think it's the crux of everything that we've been talking about. So if anybody wants to just throw a guess at what they think.
How many relationships are there in this picture? What do you think, guys? How many relationships are there in this picture? This is central to the point about emotional intelligence in a family setting. What are we saying, guys? Okay, so we got some here we go, chats coming in. 16, sorry. Okay, some saying 16, some saying 4, some saying 11, some saying 7 or 8, some saying quite a few actually different ones coming through. So we've got different answers coming. Some are high as 14, some are 16, some are 5, some are 16. Just there might be a little bit of confusion here between your understanding your question about, guys, she said relationships. How many relationships can you see in this picture? What she didn't say, judging off the answers, 16 for example, is how many personalities are there in this picture? Okay. Okay, so let's just, Miriam, how many relationships have you got going on in this picture? Okay,
so we've got the relationship with obviously the mother and herself as a person, and then we've got the relationship with the father and himself as a person, and then we've got relationship between them, obviously as a married couple, and then we've got relationship with the children themselves, and then also peer-to-peer as siblings or wider relationship they have. So I think that's what we're trying to get at in terms of the relationships. And with the married, what we're trying to get at here with how should we use these findings, so how should we use the personality test once we know what our personality types are, how should we use our love languages within this sort of unit, and why is it useful, and what will it do? And I think we kind of covered this in terms of it will help you to strengthen, inshallah, that kind of family unit through understanding yourself, and then obviously through understanding yourself and your spouse, and obviously then through understanding your children as well. So really just bringing those relationships together and stronger.
I like that. I like this example. The way you've done it is that there's when we look at family, we just think of parents and then children, and we think of two relationships, perhaps. What we don't think of, and this is common, that before parenting, there's a marriage between you two as, you know, husband and wife. So that's a really, really key relationship. If that's not right, chances are 99% of the parenting is going to be ineffective or toxic, right? A toxic
Do you
marriage.
know what's really interesting? Sorry, I just want to bring this in. With what you were saying, that how that obviously between the spouse and it's so important, because that is essentially the foundation. And there's this narrative going around where it's like, oh, you know, put the kids first, put the kids first. And absolutely, I hear put the kids first in terms of they're hungry, they need to eat, you know, when they're little, etc., etc. But it's your marriage is going to be the absolute foundation, and whatever you role model. So, you know, even role modeling the love languages and the understanding of each other and how you treat each other in the relationship is going to essentially become that emotional blueprint that your children are now going to. How many of us, subhanAllah, like, how many of us say things to our children and we think, oh my gosh, I sound like my mum, right? Or we'll say things like that, and that's what I mean by the be that negative or positive, but that's the emotional blueprint that they receive. And that's why we've chosen to obviously not just talk about the children, but chosen to talk about it as a thriving family unit and how important it actually is.
Beautiful. And that's, well, we can go one further than you did. If you draw back from the children to yourself and your spouse, you've got to draw back a little bit further. Actually, not you got to, you have to draw back further to you and yourself, me, myself, and I. And you have to, because you got to start as an individual. Before you met your spouse, you're an individual. You've had, well, 20, 30 years of personality development and upbringing before you met him or her, right? And we know men are from Mars and women are from Venus, right? So we're always going to be different. And so it's really important to understand yourself first and foremost. And I honestly really would encourage this to every high school kid, pre-marriage, okay, 16 to 24, to really spend a lot of time. We should be nurturing these guys for what's coming ahead. And the best people to do that are people who are married, because they've been through the, they've been through the challenges. And how many of us would love to have done this before we actually went for a rishta or an interview? And on human metrics, you can actually find, I think they go a little bit further in terms of recommending what your future spouse's personality should look like as a best fit, right? I don't know how accurate that is. Do not quote me, and don't any aunties and uncles who are listening to this and they're gonna say, right, Waqar said this, fine. My daughter's an EINTJ and she needs an ENFP, you know, and then you go and find an ENFP, and 2 weeks later, ENFP turns out to be a monster. I am not. Don't come looking for me. I'm just saying, look for Carl Jung, Myers and Briggs. Okay, I'm just saying that it's an indicator. It's actually an indicator, and it's quite good to know.
I was going to go one further and actually say, your relationship with Allah is also absolutely key here, and that's something that I focus on, obviously, within my work with my ladies, because when we talk about emotional intelligence and having that inner peace and etc., where does that come from? That's going to come from with your relationship with Allah, isn't it? So that's absolutely crux as well.
There's a question I had running in my head, but because of time, we moved on a little bit. And the question was, is your, sorry, it's here, it's in chat. The question was put very nicely. Is your way of showing love, so going outwards, the same as receiving it? So, you know, we're talking about multiple love languages. So you might like, take my example, right? I actually like all of them. I can see myself as a versatile person, liking all of them. But if I'm honest, and I've done the test, mine is actually a cross between acts of service and quality time, right? Now, I have to break that down. Do I like doing acts of service, or do I like receiving acts of service? So there is a difference between how you express your love and how you receive love. So this is really important. So by the way, folks, this work that we're talking about here in terms of love languages is based on the work of a living man by the name of Dr. Gary Chapman. He's based in the States. Subscribe to his website. He is sending mail shots every week, mashallah, and really good stuff he's got. He's written many books on it. Do download his stuff. You can get it off the internet or you can purchase it. Really, really good stuff where he actually explains the multi-dimensions of the love languages of 5, which one's dominant, which one to use. It's quite fluid. And you're absolutely right, whoever put that question in, that there will be 2 types. There'll be the one that you express and the one that you receive, and they will quite often, they don't have to be the same. For me, they're not, so one might be quality time and the other one might be active service. And that might be mood swing, it might be seasonal. Okay, so very quickly, we're just conscious of time. Please stick with us because I've got some important announcements and some things to share with you, inshallah. So I think you've covered this, haven't you? The quality of your marriage, yeah. The quality of your marriage greatly affects the way you relate to your children and the way they receive love. We saw that yesterday for mental health. Your mental health affects the mental health of your children, and that's why it's important to invest in your self-care and personal development. So the key benefit, I guess, is the interaction between the parent and child love language is pivotal to the quality of parent and child relationship. Anything you want to add here, Sister Miriam? Because there are a few questions in the Q&A that we can take.
No, I think we've pretty much covered. Yeah.
To feel loved and straighten your child's sense of being loved, you need to speak your spouse's primary love language. I think this is really, really important. We're all, those of us who are married, can relate to this. Those of us who work in a team, not necessarily a marriage, but work in a team, a duo, for example, or trio, or a team of you, a group, especially the small teams, you'll not understand this. There's a good correlation here between whether you are married in a couple, whether you are married and have children or don't have children or in a family, whether you are in a team. There's a lot of correlation here because guess what? It's all part of human development. So putting it into balance, utilizing the findings at home with your children. Anything you want to elaborate here, sister?
I think the question that always sort of comes up is how do I know what my child's love language are? And I think the first point just explains that in terms of just observing how your child expresses love to you. Obviously, when they're very young, it's like, "Mommy, look at this." As they grow older, it might be that they show you something on their phone or whatever. There's different ways basically, and it's all experience, I think, and observation is absolutely key. And I think that comes up not just in parenting and education, just observing and getting to know your child as a person. I think that's huge as a person, as opposed to just my child, if that makes sense. So I think sometimes there's a differentiation between that, knowing that your child is a human, a separate individual, a separate being with their own likes and dislikes. So yeah, that's the first one. Observe how your child expresses love to others, other relationships, be it siblings, friends, other members of family. I think the rest are sort of pretty much self-explanatory. With the become multilingual, I think that the question that was asked regarding should we just use the dominant love language or can we use all of them, that's where that sort of really fits in. Yeah.
On that point about multilingual, and to all of the folks who think which one should I have, right? This one or that one, and which way should I be? Remember this, a really important point. Michael Hart, many of us know, who did the study on the greatest leaders of all time, and he went through everybody. We know this, okay, and we should be very proud of this. He put the Prophet, peace be upon him, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, at the top of that hierarchy. The best leader of all time, right, was the Prophet, and he mentioned key features in all of that. One of the things he talks about, and one of the things that I think should be stressed quite a lot, was the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam wasn't one size fits all, was he? He wasn't one size fits all. He was, mashallah, a man, different strokes for different folks, as we would say in this day and age. In the sense that, just think about this. There's a lecture taking place in Medina, right? There's a circle that we know, we can read from the kitabs and from Hayak al-Sahaba. There's a lecture taking place in Medina, in Masjid Nabawi. You have Bilal radiallahu anhu, who's an Ethiopian, sat there. Salman al-Farsi, right, who's Persian, sat there. Suhaib al-Rumi, who is a Roman, right, he's sat there. Okay, you have Anas bin Malik, who is a child amongst the adults of the Sahabas there. You have Abdullah bin Salam, I think it was also, who's a revert from a Jewish revert, and many other people from the Ansar and the Quraysh, the Muhajirs and the Ansar, and there were many people of hierarchy in terms of Quraysh. There were people who were, slaves. There were people who were very learned, so likes of Mu'adh ibn Jabal and others, who were very, very learned and into the, I guess you could say, our present day term, academia, or the intellectual, or the researchers. You had those kinds of people, and then you had other people who were probably less so. The diversity in Medina was unbelievable. I think there's a brother here, Kanayat, I think it's you, who's from Sweden, right? I had an experience like this. Any of you who's gone to teach abroad in any of the countries, I had this experience when I went to Sweden. Zahra and I went down for an audit of a school. How many nationalities were there, Zahra, in that class, and how challenging was it for us, right, to relate to children I think there was 23 nationalities, if I'm not wrong. If you go to the UAE, you'll find 30 nationalities, something like that, right? 23 nationalities, Muslim school, 23 nationalities in one class. It was beautiful, 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 amazing to see that, right? But what it was quite challenging to be able to look at the background and the terminology that you're going to use. Firstly, we're in a foreign country, so Sweden and English. But even the locals there said, you know, it can be challenging. So that was quite challenging. It made me appreciate the emotional intelligence and the social intelligence and the cultural intelligence of the Prophet ﷺ at that point in Masjid Nabawi, and at the time of when his last sermon in his final sermon at the Hajj, before he passed away, you know, where he was able to relate to people from different cultures, different backgrounds. And that's what you call an amazing social anthropologist, right? Someone who understands the cultures of the people. And he could speak in his speech where he wouldn't have to repeat, because he could speak. The learned would understand, the person who was illiterate would understand, the person who was foreign would understand, the person who was local would understand, the person who was Arab would understand, and Ajam would understand. And the person who was rich would understand, the person who was poor would understand. That was an amazing gift of emotional intelligence that the Prophet ﷺ had, and it was given to, you know, and nurtured, mashallah. So this thing about being multilingual, and going back to what Michael Hart said, I'd just like to reiterate that situational leadership is really key. In this day and age of a dynamic world that we live in and a world that's changing, you can't be static. Times you need to be static, you need to be static. Sharia teaches us that. Some things will always stay static. We're never going to have 6 salah, 7, 8, 15, 5 salah, halas. Some things will stay static. But how we perform wudu depends on if we've got water, right? If we have wudu to our disposal, alhamdulillah, we will be able to perform wudu the way Prophet taught us. If we don't, we can use the earth, tayammum. Dynamism in you know, our life and the way we look at it is really important. So situational leadership is how we are for different people around us. I think is one of the biggest sunnahs, soft skill sunnahs that we should revive in ourselves, because we no longer can be static, where we need to be situational. So situational leadership, I just wanted to stress on that, because I see that as a big problem in the workplace, in schools, and certainly at home. So inshallah, the level of cooperation you receive from your child is usually equal to the level of connection you have with them. And folks, don't leave here, because there's a couple of really important points I want to just share as practical tools for you. So let's bring this back together. I think we've done quite a bit of work on there. There are some chats and questions I will take, inshallah, now. But just before we do that, guys and folks, brothers and sisters, first, I recommend this site called humanmetrics.com. So I've been using this as a professional now for recruitment, for staff training. When we do ilm to amal lessons, before we even start our lessons in our pilots or, you know, tarbiyah of the children, we do a test of them. So for adults, you can use 2 sites, humanmetrics.com. Trust me, you're going to be there till iftar, right? Or possibly sahur, yeah, because when you get your teeth into it. 16 Personalities is also quite good as well. They're both good. They serve a different function for me, so I use both of them. And for children, Zahra, I don't know if you put the link for the children into the chat, but I know it by heart. It's the buzz test in iCould.com. So if your child is quite articulate from 7, they could do that with a little bit of aid if they're not. But certainly by 9 and 10, you can start getting your children to take an honest evaluation test and try to get an indication from there. Bearing in mind, it's going to be quite, you know, dynamic. They're in the formative years anyway with the personality, certainly up until 21. Love Languages, Dr. Gary Chapman's work. It's a very simple website. There's a quiz there. And these don't take long, do they? They take about 10, 15 minutes maximum.
They're quite quick, yeah.
Just be honest about your core. Don't talk about your situation or your scenario. Talk about your core, who you are when you wake up in the morning, when you sleep at night. Ask your spouse that question and do a correlation, but don't make it biased, okay? And take a very honest opinion. Do it once or twice and see what you get. And get the percentages for E or whatever it is, E or I, you know, S or I, get S or N, sorry. Get your for the four kind of codes that you're going to get, 4-letter code that you're going to get, you will get a percentage. That percentage will show you how strong you are in a particular way, or are you medial? Okay. So we've got Human Metrics, 16personalities.com, and we've also got iCould.com, the buzz test. That's for children. And then love languages. I think there's one for children as well for love languages. I haven't got it on the slide, but you can search for it, inshallah, Dr. Gary Chapman's work. That's the key languages. Before I go on to what's coming on this week and why it's important, there's 2 books that I would strongly recommend. The 3 actually. There's Emotional Intelligence by, is it Gary Goldman? Gary Goldman, I think it is. Look at Emotional Intelligence by Gary Goldman, not Coleman, Goldman, okay? That's a really good book on emotional intelligence, understanding that. Number 2, it's a book by Sheikh Abu Ghudda, rahimullah, which is, all of us should know this one, Ar-Rasul al-Mu'allim, yeah? The Prophet, the Teacher, or the Prophet, the Teacher, Ar-Rasul al-Mu'allim, yeah? And that's a cracking book about 21 teaching techniques or parenting techniques you can take from that, right, from the greatest teacher in humanity, 21 techniques. And in there, you will find lots of emotional intelligence, okay? That will be really, really good for you. Ar-Rasul al-Mu'allim, the Prophet, the Teacher, is a very, very good book. And last but not least, a book which I got last week, and honestly, it resembles the entire series. The entire series that we're talking about, the role of adults and children in nurturing change makers in a changing world. This book by Sir Ken Robinson, who unfortunately and sadly has passed away, the late Sir Ken Robinson. Many of you would have heard of him. He's like one of the #1 speakers on TED Talks. A great educationalist. A lot of views that, mashallah, many of us can agree with from a Muslim philosophy perspective. He's come up with this book called, I think this was his last book that he published in 2018-19 before he passed away. You, Your Child, and School. If you read the contents page, it honestly mirrors, and this was, it mirrors the entire webinar series that we put together without even reading this book. I have, alhamdulillah, had a chance to read much of it, most of it. Parenting and knowing your child, knowing yourself, as you were saying, Miriam, it's the first 2-3 chapters in here. In fact, the first 3 is get your bearings right, know your role, know your child, raise them strong, understand what is school for. Choose the right school, and then it goes on to building the relationship, tackle the problem, look to the future. That sums up this webinar series that we're on session 4 of, and we're heading to session 5 now. Strongly recommend this, folks. What, $9.99? A great investment for you. It's called You, Your Child, and School by Sir Ken Robinson. It's fantastic, inshallah. Now, that brings us nicely on to, so we talked about personality types, emotional intelligence, and love languages. Honestly, go away, get in touch with us if you have any issues. Get your codes, do it with your spouse, do it with your children, get onto social media with us, share some of the stuff with us. If you found it beneficial, please tell us about it. If you didn't, tell us about it, because we need to learn about how what works, what doesn't work. Different things work for different people, so we get that. And do get in touch with us. Inshallah, all of this content will be made available for you after this, as I mentioned, through the suite of digital resources, the library. There's 2 webinars coming up which follow on really nicely from this, and going back to your diagram early on about emotional intelligence, and I said this from here on, it really sums it up quite well. This Wednesday coming, inshallah, what is your parental leadership style? So we talked about your personality type. That's not your leadership style. We all have a style of leadership. And, you know, it could be a combination of things. It could be one particular one. It's really important to understand your personality, your leadership style in connection with your personality and your love languages. And more importantly, when you work backwards, so working with the end in mind, what works best for your child? Now, you know what works best for your child, but do you know what is your personality type and your child's personality type and love languages? So you see that? See how it all works, where we know we know you're going to be the best person. So sorry, we know that you're the best person in that scenario who's there every day with your child, right? Especially if you're a mom and you're giving birth to that thing, you know, you know that child better, I would say, than even the father, right? You know that child, and we know you know that child. Sorry, we know that you are the main person to know that child. But the question is, do you know the child from inside? And so working backwards, you need to start with your personality today. You need to start with your love languages today. You need to do that with your spouse. You know, you need to look at you as a couple. What's your personalities, and where are the conflict points, trigger points, differences, similarities, strengths, opportunities. And then you need to look at you as a couple now parenting your children. But before you do that, you need to look at each child. Absolutely. Right? True. Where they're at, how they're wired. Allah's wired them differently. Once you do that at 3 levels, that's what the picture is about. Once you do that with yourself, me, myself, and I, and you unlock that, and you do that with you and him or her, right? And then you go on to your children, about each one. Girls and boys will be different. Boys to boys will be different. Girls to girls will be different. Then you can work backwards and start to identify which style, parental style, you need to adopt for your children. I honestly think this is as simple as that. There are other complications, no doubt, but at the core of our parenting dilemmas and classroom dilemmas, a lot of it comes down to psychology of knowing the other, or knowing the object and the objective. And for that, you need to attend Wednesday's lecture to understand the parental leadership styles. Then you are able to marry them up and say, right, which one do I need to choose? And skills was also on that slide. If you notice, it was on the 5th one about skills. Why are clubs important? Because if you go back to what I said about your child finding themselves, finding the sense of purpose, if you spoke about the identity crisis 2 webinars ago, the sense of belonging. Well, also, from a discovery, self-awareness as a self-discovery or self-regulation perspective, it's really important for them to throw themselves out of the comfort zone into clubs and skills that can develop their core and their personality and their character. Once they start doing that, it's brain science. The amygdala, which I don't want to start sounding, quite medical with you guys here, right? But there's something in our brain the size of a what's the size? It's the size of a badam, right? It's the size of an almond, okay? That's how big it is, and it's called the amygdala. That is the main thing that needs to be developed in children early on, right? And that's where we get our flight of, fear, fight or flight from, right? And that's really, really important that you can develop yourself. So anybody's asking, can it be molded? Can we have a growth mindset? Can we develop emotional intelligence? Absolutely. And part of that is what you're seeing on the slide here. And the clubs on Saturday, inshallah, which I'll be doing, waiting for the guest speaker to confirm. We're looking at 7 or 10 extracurricular clubs that your children will need before adulthood. I really, really encourage everybody to attend these 2. There's another one on next Sunday. I might as well make a mention of that one. It's the final one in the series next Sunday, same time. That is looking at intellectual development and questioning our institutes. Are Muslim faith schools or schools in general and madrasas that we send our kids for tarbiyah, outsourced tarbiyah, which we should be doing at home, are they fit for purpose? And are they developing our children for a tomorrow's world, or are they stuck in yesterday's world? That's a critical conversation. I'm really pleased to announce Dr. Farah Ahmed from Cambridge University, who's the head teacher of a Muslim faith school, has confirmed availability. We also have a head teacher from a mainstream school, and also a head teacher from a madrasa, inshallah. I'm going to be attending that. It's going to be a cracking couple of last 3 finale of our webinar series. You can see how it all links into the narrative. So I know we've gone over our time and many of you still here, mashallah. What's your main takeaway points from this webinar, folks? Let us know in the chat section, or raise your hand if you want to. I think there was a hand raised. I'm sorry if I haven't come to you. What was the main takeaway point that you've taken from this summary? Sister Miriam, let's go to you first. And whilst our audience wants to, inshallah, share their main takeaway points, and then we'll come on to some last few questions that have gone unanswered. What's your main takeaway point?
I think my main takeaway is, I think what I said in the beginning, that it starts with us, really. It starts with us and our emotional intelligence and knowing ourselves and understanding ourselves. And one thing I want to say here, this comes up a lot with my ladies, is that that can feel really heavy sometimes, like, oh my gosh, like, it was responsibility of me. I need to know everything. I need to do everything. And it's remembering that, yes, that is important, but also remembering that we can still do that alongside nurturing those same qualities in our children, because as much as our children are growing, we are growing as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So we have one here from, thank you, Sister Osma. We need to understand ourselves better in order for us to understand our children. That's exactly what you said. If you're taking that away, that's the main thing that we wanted to get across. And we might have already known that, maybe it's been reinforced. Something about homework, find out who we really are in and who we live with. I like Sister Mashallah, Salwa, I love that. So yeah, there's a lot of homework to do. Finding out the other person, probably more than ourselves. It's never too late to unlearn and learn new things.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Sister Sadra. Beautifully put. I honestly, there's so much unlearning to do. Emotional intelligence is not fixed, and it is our responsibility to tune into that for growth, especially with this changing world around us. Abiha, mashallah, learn my children's love languages and operate in a more aware manner. Abiha, for those of you who know Abiha, she's got all 5, right? She's strong, mashallah, super warrior in all 5 love languages. May Allah bless her, mashallah ta'ala, and you know, her children and family too, inshallah. Any others? So yeah, I think I've taken a lot, mashallah, from this too. It's all oh, there's a question here. Okay, sorry. I'm just going through the questions now. Okay, all right. I think that's the main thing here. So there's another couple of questions for you guys now. But just before I do, those of you who need to leave, you can just take our contact details. If there's anything that you weren't sure about, anything you want, you can catch us on social media at Ilm to Amal. There's a WhatsApp number there for you, and also the email address that you can email. Please do go into the store to look at what you can find. A lot of the work that we develop at Ilm to Amal is rooted in the sciences that we are actually talking about and developing. This is all in-house stuff that we've been through back to front with our staff members, our directors, our curriculum authors, and this is what we feed into the curriculum to then, which your children then obviously learn from. So you can access that, some of the free wellbeing packs that we have on i2astore.com. You can also support the charity, as we said, inshallah ta'ala, for those of you who are able to. A lot of, all of our profit and thing goes back into regenerating projects for the youth and further research. It's a not-for-profit organization, alhamdulillah. Thank you very much, Brother Anas. MashaAllah, always good to hear from you in Southampton. Very good, beneficial session. I will explore the tools, Jazakallah khairan, make the session a sadaqah jariyah for you. Ameen, thumma ameen. Thank you very much.